Mike kick off with some Cal Poly slides on the overall regulatory economics and labor costs and roll through some of that. David's going to roll through the real world reality check on what's going on out there with H2A, and Matt and I will jump in. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike to roll the slides. And Mike, you want to use the clicker? You want to say next slide?
Sure, I can use the clicker.
Okay, let's pass it over. Get us started, Mike.
Great. So what we've got here is a bit of, let's see where we're at here. Okay. Basically, this is just work that I've done with my colleague Lynn Hamilton at Cal Poly, and it's a bunch of different projects, and so I wanted to just put some context together, right? So the first bit is a project we worked on last year. We were looking at a couple crops in particular, and we wanted to say, okay, what is labor's impact on it, right? And so we took from UC cooperative extension budgets, and we try to normalize these. So over the years, we said, okay, how does labor break out, right? So we got cultivation and harvest labors where we were really broken out, and we wanted to normalize these to get hours per acre. So we can think about it, right? And what sticks out, obviously is strawberries here, you get 2,000 hours of labor per acre for harvesting versus everything else, and then what that looks like over on our percent side. So how we can think about labor and how that splits out, and why this is important is we were looking at how automation and technology might come in and help with this, with these high labor costs. But to provide a little bit more context, you think of like, wow, yeah, strawberries have 89% of that labor goes into harvest. Well, what does that really mean if we're thinking about applying technology to solve that? And so, well, how many acres of strawberries do we have? How many actual strawberry companies do we have, working in this? And that's where we pulled 22 census acres in operations, and I think this is what really sticks it out. Sorry, there's a lot of numbers on this table, but I think it's important to note. So we've got all the way over there on the right, we can think about in terms of labor, how many hours, millions of hours in a year based on the number of acres and per acre stuff, and we can see that, strawberries is a huge portion of this stuff, and it has a huge portion of the labor that's being used in harvest. But if we think about the number of operations, it's just 3% out of these categories. It's only 3% of the operations. So if we were thinking about at the time, how does automation and technology work? Well, if I'm thinking about a third party that's going to invest in this business, investing in harvest technology for strawberries isn't necessarily going to pay off as much as it would for something like avocados, where you have a much bigger market, right, for people that would invest in these. So that was a bit of that. So just thinking about context and how these things are different across these different crops. And then we move over to the workforce, which these guys are going to talk a lot more on. And this was a big thing that stuck out from our census, and it's just the general decrease in the number of ag laborers in California. So this is overall in California from census 2012 over to 22, and the big difference here is the decrease in the number of folks that are working less than 150 days a year. So that part-time workforce has decreased quite a bit. And then the unpaid workforce has decreased as well, almost in half, right? And so that's, basically your family working for you for free. But our full-time workforce has stayed fairly consistent. We go over to H2A. Again, I just pulled these numbers really quick. These are applications. These are not actually people working in these. We've seen those applications in California drop off, right? You guys are going to talk a little bit more about that. Unless you want to now. Yeah, so there's that. And I think the next thing to think about, so again, back into the technology, where are we seeing? So we were interviewing companies at FIRA last year, thinking about, well, where is the investment being made? Most of that investment is being made on the cultural side of things, not on the harvest side of things. Even though we saw the amount of hours spent and the amount of labor that's spent is mostly on harvest, the actual applicability of harvest is difficult from a technology side because it doesn't transfer across crops very well. And that's kind of the big thing. So if I'm a third-party investor, again, I want something that I can sell to a lot of people, and I can't do that on the harvest side. I can on the cultural side. And so that's what we see, and that's where we see these things at. And the last little bit, and this is about regulation. So again, my colleague Lynn Hamilton and I have been traversing across California for the last 15 years, doing case studies on farms and talking about what your actual cost of production is. And so we get cooperative extension budgets, right? UC Davis, all the land-grant universities across the country produce these, and this is your cost of production from the cultivation side, harvest side, and whatnot. But we also have to deal with regulatory costs, and so we've been documenting those regulatory costs and going through that. And so this was a case study on a lettuce grower out in Salinas that interviewed, Lynn had interviewed back in 2006. And then we returned in 17 and we returned in 24. And so we see, these are production costs right here have gone up and gone up. Regulatory costs as a percent of those production costs have gone up quite a bit. And when we look at those regulatory costs in particular, we go from having no food safety regulations, very little water, air quality and labor safety regulations back in 2006, $109 an acre. And in 2024, it was what, $1,600 an acre. So huge increase in regulatory costs, right? And where are most of those regulatory costs implemented for that grower? 78, 79% of it is labor related, mostly labor related. Healthcare, workers' compensation, labor wage requirements, that's things like overtime, piece rate, those new piece rate laws, and then some of that other stuff. So it is exacerbating those things. We've also done this out in the Central Valley with a bunch of different crops, and you see similar increases as well. So that's a little bit of context for what's going on with labor right now, and I think I'll pass that around and let you guys talk.
Yeah, and before David jumps in, I just want to set the kind of statewide picture for you guys, California-wise. California Ag paid $16.3 billion for 850 million hours of ag work last year, and that's a lot on both accounts. And we're a $2 billion industry, so 16 billion in labor. It's one of the biggest inputs on a farm, and to the point that the Cal Poly team found out the difference in crops for harvest and cultivation. 2/3 of those hours are harvest, and it's the part we've automated and can automate so far the least. It's the hardest thing in the world to replicate that skilled farm worker hand and that eye that can pick out which one needs to get harvested and right now and how, and can put it into a bin after picking it carefully. That's really hard. The non-harvest stuff, we're making a lot of progress. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's only 1/3 of the hours. So the weeding, thinning, planting machines you see all over this valley and other ag valleys, those are doing the job, but they're managing toward 1/3 of the hour count. The 2/3 of the hours, that's where these guys do a lot of their work on harvest. So let's jump into David's slides.
Hear me? Yeah, thank you, Walt. I think I want to build on what Walt briefly said on skilled labor performing the harvest activities. That's kind of the world we live in. My name's David Scaroni. I'm a partner at Fresh Harvest. My dad started the company in '83, almost by accident. He really wanted to be a farmer, and then decided that he was growing his own crop, and he was going to construct some harvest machines to harvest his own crop. And lo and behold, before his cauliflower crop was even ready, the neighbor started calling him and said, "Hey, you got those harvest machines? Can you come over and harvest my melons?" And lo and behold, he ended up in the harvest business. We've had a relatively interesting history of arriving, I guess, at this point. We are the largest private employer of H-2A labor in the United States. It still costs us $5 to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, again, it's been a journey, but there's a few of, I guess, I don't want to belabor the milestones, but kind of happenstance into the harvesting business. We were part of this cordon field automation with Fresh Express in the early 2000s, where that was actually a big deal, removing the core out of iceberg and romaine lettuce to send it to these salad plants as the bag salad market segment emerged, and leaving that core product in the field. That was a huge change in process, huge change in equipment, infrastructure investment. And then 2006 rolls around, and two things happen. We were at Fresh Express's behest sent to Guanajuato, Mexico to have a diversified raw product source, and also increased border enforcement in Yuma, Arizona, and Imperial Valley in the wintertime. basically the entire produce industry lost its what we thought was a legal domestic workforce 40% overnight. Just a few checkpoints, and lo and behold, the industry lost a massive amount of its labor force, which was on the border. You would assume, there was a higher percentage of legal workers. So lo and behold, us, Tanner and Anil, Foothill Packing, a few other suppliers, shippers realized that this you can't have a produce crop in the ground and have these type of black swan events occur. So we were forced in the H2A program. We did not go in willingly. We were trying the first few years to figure out every way not to do H2A, and then we had an epiphany that, wait, this is where the world's going. Farm workers aren't raising their kids to be farm workers. Nobody's raising their kids to be farm workers. So we learned to embrace it. In 2013, we diversified in other crops. Now we're touching strawberries, table grapes, onions, garlic, peppers, basically any high labor crop in the western United States. We've harvested in some form with H2A labor. And then in 2016, we actually migrated from Guanajuato, Mexico to northern Baja. Again, we could not make the central Mexico operation work. We learned how to operate in Mexico, but what we actually were able to accomplish was we kind of created a training ground for the H2A labor, because a big part of this program's success, like Walt mentioned, that skilled hand of harvesting the crop. This is not warm bodies being thrown on some equipment and, hey, figure out how to get the order. And this is very intentional recruitment. So what we learned is the only way to make this program work with the cost, with all the requirements, everything, we have to bring a productive worker up. So we've been intentionally focused on that for the last 15 years, and we really have developed a system that, with our Mexico farming operations, that, basically we invest in training and worker development in Mexico, and then the workers that qualify, they're the ones that come up on these H2A contracts. That is the only way we feel this program can be successful on any sort of scale. I guess we're very, protective. We do all our own recruiting, filing. I guess as vertically integrated as you can be on the H2A program. And then we, I guess the last thing, we made a small detour into Idaho. We feel that's a viable area to grow, harvest, and cool product at some point as this produce. I think you'll see regionalization of produce and supply in this country. You're not gonna. I think things will migrate closer to their end sources. Again, I guess our little experiment in Idaho, which is hopefully we'll be back there someday, is a testament to that.
So David, you and I were talking about that slide. Yeah. I mean, clearly, Dad had a 20-point strategy PowerPoint slide on 83 that he executed to perfection.
No plan. This is, again, I think this, I mean, if I don't want to belabor it, but again, there was no plan here to do any of this. Again, it's just seeing the world for what it was and seeing opportunities, and again, a lot of painful lessons along the way. But again, we just went through another one of this government shutdown that adversely affected us. But you think you have things figured out, and you never do. So, but again, kudos to. I plagiarized this next slide from National Council of Ag Employers. They are the leading H2A advocacy group that advocates. I'm going to go to another slide, but as you can see, this is the usage. Why is this graph perpetually increasing? Of my opinion, and I think any demographic-focused person, this country has undergoing a demographic collapse. We're living in a kind of a post-industrialized time. You see birth rates have fallen way below replacement rates. What's the first industry to get hit by declining birth rates and lack of a workforce? It's ag. So again, I think that's what's driving. If you look at the decline of fertility rates since 2005, southwestern United States. So where is the H2A program growing the most? This was originally a southeast-focused program, Florida, Georgia, those areas. In the 70s, it has rapidly expanded to western United States. I think that color graph is a big reason why it has expanded to western United States in the last 10 to 15 years. And then I want to speak briefly. They just adopted a final rule, an interim final rule. National Council of Ag Employers and other associations have been fighting for the viability of the H-2A program. Believe it or not, there's a lot of interests that don't want this program to work. There's some ideologies that, H-2A workers are taking jobs from willing domestic workers, which we all know that is not the case. But there's finally, after multiple lawsuits, multiple battles, at this present moment, there's finally been some reprieve where there is a housing credit offered on the wage, this AWAR wage. It's, anybody who uses or is familiar with the H-2A program, it was escalating 7 to 8 to 9% every year, year over year. And as we all know in agriculture, you can't pass those costs on. So there was an economic ceiling that I feel we were running into. I'm sure Matt can attest to that this program was becoming, even though it's where things are going, it was becoming cost unsustainable on some of these commodities where you cannot pass that cost on. So at present moment, there's a credit. I feel it's, the H-2A program is a domestic worker protection program. This housing credit, no matter what the UFW spends it, this is a way to, quote unquote, level the playing field, because when you bring these workers up, you're required to give them free housing, free transportation. A domestic worker, they have housing costs. They're paying rent. They have childcare. They have costs to get to the work site, where the H-2A workers do not. So again, if we're really trying to protect domestic workers here, which this program is designed to do, this is a somewhat fair way. This is a fair start to do it, where these workers, where there's a non-cash benefit to having free housing. I mean, I don't have a free house. I don't have a free car. So again, hopefully this can sustain. This is the only state crazy enough to maybe pass a minimum ag worker, a minimum wage or something like that for an agriculture worker. I mean, they did it in fast food. I can see them maybe doing that here and erasing these gains, or erasing this progress in this state. But again, federally, we think hopefully this rule will hold up. There was a slight effort in 2020 by the Trump administration to freeze the AWAR, which was overturned. This rule took those lessons and is a lot more firmly established than the 2020 effort to freeze the AWAR.
And David, before you jump in too much further, I love this slide. This is probably the most significant positive change that we've seen on ag labor costs in a while. It's legislation. It's not just an executive order. It's been passed federal level, and now the states will implement it state by state, like you see here. Every state should see a decrease in that adverse effect wage rate, right? That rate that we use to balance domestic and international labor. Those reductions in cost, those are real. And H-2A costs, you think about domestics, it's $18 to $20 an hour in a lot of states that do specialty. H-2A adds AWAR, housing, transport, and food to it. So that's $28 to $30 in a lot of cases for California growers. That's coming down by $3.
Yeah. So again, it's just, but again, we're competing on a global scale. I mean, if you look at what Canada's guest worker program is paying, I mean, this is not out of line with what Canada's. I mean, these people are flying. If you're recruited out of Mexico, they're flying over the United States to go work in Canada for wages more similar to this than the $20 an hour. So again, we're competing on a global scale here, and you can't be foolish enough in this country to think that we're somehow immune from, global economic competition. So again, this is also fair to the domestic worker. Which, if we're going to protect domestic workers, let's do things like this. There's a real cost. There's a real economic value to providing free housing and free transportation. So, and then real quick, I did some cool AI productivity charts. As you can see, AI screwed up my line graph, but this line graph was originally supposed to show we got into H-2A in 2006, and we slowly implemented these workers. This is pounds per man hour on cord romaine lettuce. This is what we live and die by on how we harvest cord romaine lettuce and deliver it to our customers. In 2006, we were 133 pounds per man hour. AI kind of screwed up the middle, but through no real technological innovation, no major, automation, we're at 327 pounds per man hour. Just focusing, tweaking, getting slightly better. But the main contributor to this is we've incorporated, majority of our crews are now 95% H2A on these types of jobs, and we're just bringing up a more productive, eager worker. So again, this is where you have to realize the value of H2A, just because again, the cost of the program without the productivity will make this cost unsustainable, or economically infeasible. So again, this is, I guess, a real life testament data point of what we've had to do. Had we remained flat, probably out of business. Again, we've figured out how to harness that productivity and just focus. Again, no real automation improvement during that time period. Slight improvements, but nothing substantial. And then final 2 points. Walt asked me to, I guess, ask a question. Wholesale immigration reform. We spent a fair amount of time in Washington, D.C. This country is ran by 18-year-old lobbyists, not your congressman. And what we've basically learned, we've all seen, immigration reform, it's coming this year. The ugly truth of this system we're living in, it's designed to perpetuate the dysfunction while enriching those involved in the process, lobbyists, consultants, and attorneys. Okay, every time you hear these immigration bills, you start to see all these lobbyists and consultants. Everybody gets their retainers, and then comes to a vote, and it dies every time. Again, there seems to be a pattern here emerging where that it's more feeding on the process. And like I said, if they actually solved immigration, I mean, what are they going to fight about? What are they going to what are they going to pay all these lobbyist consultant for if we actually solve the problem? So again, there seems to be a self-perpetuating dysfunction that seems to continue on. And then massive automation and field harvest. My personal opinion, it's 15 to 20 years off. Protected. It would be a combination of AI will make a difference. It will help the back office processes. I don't think it's going to be, you're going to have AI. AI is not going to be, it'll help on some of these things, but the actual hand-skilled harvest, I think you're going to need basically humanoid robots and some sort of protected culture. As we see protected culture, it's very expensive. A lot of those companies go bankrupt. So again, there's a capital component to that. And but again, we will eventually get there. I just probably not as soon as everybody thinks we will. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Perfect. And actually, roll it one more slide. We'll just put the headshot. So that's perfect. So Matt, you've heard the researcher perspective. You've heard the H2A FLC perspective. You're in that game. What would you add to the conversation, and where do you see it going? And maybe a little bit of an angle on automation. Now, is automation impacting your business and your customers' business in a starting to be meaningful way, or not yet?
Good morning. Maybe I'll just introduce myself quickly, and then I'll answer. I'll answer first. Yeah, automation is affecting the business on the grower side, on the cultural practice side. I mean, we operate. We're a 6-year-old company, so we have a. But really, since year one, we've been operating the leading edge ag tech equipment that is owned by our customers, right? But with our labor and operations running it. So we've seen the different generations of this equipment come out almost entirely in the weeding and thinning arena, where there is so much, so many different options and so much investment. And those machines keep getting better and better and better. So you see the impact there. So I think for us, like the weeding and thinning, groups of people in the field with hose, that business, a headcount business that's extremely expensive way of doing that task, is evolving quickly, right? And that's a good thing. So we're invested in trying to be part of the solution rather than just trying to be, billing for headcount that needs to be done more efficiently. So operating that equipment is perfectly in line with what we're trying to do, right? Help provide solutions to growers. We have also operated automated harvest equipment in different iterations, and it's extremely challenging for all the reasons that both Michael and David mentioned. It's just a much harder thing to do and much more vertical, right? You can come up with a solution for a particular crop, and it takes forever and is, has its yield losses and all of its penalties that come along with it. So it requires a lot of deep pockets and patience. So I don't see that developing anywhere near as quickly.
And real quick, let's break it down for the audience. The place where we're making harvest progress turns out to largely be processed, right? So when
Right,
you're
makes
cutting it
sense.
up, putting it in a bag, when you're putting it in a wine bottle, no problem. You can be a little less gentle to it on the harvest. But when it's fresh and you're showing it to the customer whole form, that's really, really hard.
Yeah, so let me, if I could just introduce myself. I'm Matt Rogers. I know many of you have been at this conference in the past. From my former role, I spent 13 years at Whole Foods Market in produce procurement, and really mostly working on the supplier and grower side of our business. I had the dream job for many years going out around the Central South America, around this country, finding the best growers, meeting the growers that supplied us, understanding the issues that impact them. I ended up being in charge of social compliance and environmental stuff and food safety at some point in my journey there. And at one point I was tasked with trying to really dig in on understanding more on those issues in our produce supply. So I started to learn a lot about labor. I was dispatched to the problem areas, right? When something would come up, we'd get some kind of report of a labor problem one place or another. I would be the one to be sent out to try to figure out what happened, talk to the grower, figure out what the solutions are, et cetera. And then I also, because we were always focused on trying to find the highest integrity produce, would go out and I got to see the best operations from a quality perspective, from a environmental organic perspective, as well as from a labor perspective. And, I learned what many of you know, that, quality in is quality out in many cases. And when I saw the best operations, the people who were most invested in their workforce often ended up being the people with the best quality, with the best operations. And the opposite is true as well. But I kept hearing in my travels, labor, 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 labor. At some point I started hearing, well, FLC, I can't get that information. I don't know. We don't have the transparency. You don't understand. And as a retail buyer, people want to give you the answers, but you also, you're sitting at this sort of stratospheric level where you're not boots on the ground and don't really understand how things happen. So I started to learn more and more about that, and eventually I learned, look, a present company accepted, much of the industry, is underserved by the status quo of many of the farm labor contractors, right? There's something like 10,000 registered farm labor contractors. There's hundreds and hundreds that do H2A, and many of them are not equipped to properly serve the workforce or the grower. And everybody, sort of seemed like both communities were underserved. And I thought I saw an opportunity to create a more modern, professional, compliant, tech-enabled, efficiency-focused labor service provider. And so that's what we started 6 years ago, started this company, and we are an H2A labor company, and we've just been trying to build, and our focus is really on, can we be a better employer and a better operator in order to provide better outcomes? And obviously, with the cost of labor increasing so dramatically, in this state especially, but nationwide, and with the cost of the H2A program growing really in such an unsustainable way, our model is we can get better value for the labor dollar through our detailed, proactive management of the workforce from A to Z, from the moment of recruitment through the entire employment experience, and by adding professionally managed operations, analytics, information in real time, all those things that help get better decision making and better value for the labor dollar now. So that's really kind of our reason for existence. We do that through workforce engagement, through trying to do deep training, through really trying to manage the workforce effectively. so that we get better labor value now as we all work on and hope for and build to a future where there is maybe less labor needed in certain areas. But in the meantime, we're focused on trying to provide the best outcomes possible for the dollar spent. And really, that's our reason for existence. So on H-2A reform, David went through the new rule, and I just want to add, I think that the bottom line for a grower in California is that you're going to basically now be paying $16.90 next year. The minimum wage in California goes to $16.90. Right now we're $16.50, right? So next year the minimum wage here will be $16.90, and the impact of this new rule will mean that instead of what's currently $19.97 wage hourly for an H-2A employee, now next year you're going to be paying $16.90. So it basically brings the wage down to the minimum wage. And that does two things. I mean, one, right off the top, you save the $3.07. It would, by the rule that they passed at the DOL that creates this new structure, you do all the math, you'd end up much lower than $16.90. You take all the credits and do all the stuff, right? But the minimum wage is always going to be the floor. So the impact of this rule will be in Arizona. Next year, the minimum wage will be $15.15, so that'll be the minimum. California, $16.90. In many states where there is a minimum wage, you're going to end up capped there as a floor. But you get that savings, get it down to the minimum wage. The other thing it does, for those of you who work in H-2A or those who may be considering it, one of the things with H-2A is that when you have local or domestic workforce in the same arena as you have H-2A workers, you have an impact where you have to pay the local people the H-2A wage in some cases, called corresponding work. It's kind of a detail of the H-2A program, but one of the benefits of this rule is that issue really gets neutralized. So it makes it much more effective for a grower to think about hedging into a little bit of H-2A to have the benefit of H-2A really is the efficiency of the workforce, the consistency of the workforce. We're there 6-7 days a week whenever you need, right? It's the same people all the time, clockwork. And you get the same people year after year after year. You get that efficiency that comes from having that consistency and the professionalism of the same people all the time, which you really can't get these days with the domestic workforce at scale anyway. Maybe some of you are accomplishing that with a smaller workforce. So the benefit is it may open the door. Certainly the savings makes the program a lot more affordable. But it may also open the door for some people to experiment a little more with H-2A because you don't have to worry about increasing wages for your local workforce in the same way that you did before. So I think that's another important part of it. There's another detail in the H-2A reform thing that gets lost in this big news of the wage decrease, which is staggered entry capability, which is another cost and flexibility savings. One of the things that's happened with H-2A over the past years that we've been involved, which is a relatively short timeline, is that it's rule after rule. It's sort of the death by 1,000 cuts of loss of every little piece of flexibility that you might hope for, every little thing that might help you make the program a little more effective or use workers in a different way. They just kept sort of closing the door on all these things. So you get locked into these really rigid structures that cost money at the end of the day. So one of the benefits that's come out recently is this sort of new formal approach to being able to stagger entries. So on one application of H-2A, you can say, look, I'm going to bring people in over different time periods instead of being stuck in these really rigid dates. So a little in the weeds, but there are some really good sort of regulatory relief items coming down the road, and the wage thing is really the big news. Sorry, Walt. The last thing I want to mention on ag tech, which I started in the beginning to answer Walt's question, but I think that the reality is going to be that as technology evolves, it's going to be in these particular activities, but even the equipment that we're operating on now, sort of this latest gen weeders and thinners, right? They all have their place, right? It's a certain field. You got to be in a certain window for it to be effective. The field's too wet. The crop is too dense. There's 1,000 reasons why they don't work, and there's a lot of opportunity when they do. And the key thing, I think, in the near term is going to be flex and understand how and when to use the equipment to your advantage and how and when to cut your losses and do it the old way, because you end up with double costs if you're not careful. And the other thing that we see is that this equipment is expensive. So professional operators do matter, right? It's not just put a driver on the machine and think you're going to get the same results as if you have somebody who understands that equipment and knows how to run it. So we've really focused on training a group of equipment operators who really know, like these guys who run the laser weeders, understand how to run that equipment, right? It's I mean, those things move at a snail's pace out there, right? Depending on the weed density, because it's calculating the dose that's necessary to work the bed that it's in, and it's going to tell you to speed up or slow down based on what it's seeing through the cameras. But that operator matters, right? If that guy's not paying attention, you're not going to get the results that you paid all that money for that equipment for. So I would just, tell everybody that operators matter in that arena. Don't think that the machine's going to do it and you can put any old guy on that tractor that's pulling it. So those are my thoughts for now, Walton.
No, that's great. Appreciate that. We'll open it up to the audience. We hit about the 10-minute mark. So if you have questions, Dina's in the back with the microphone. But I will throw it out to you guys this way. So we have H2A. I've got it at about 10% of California workforce. Next 5 to 10 years, what happens to H2A as a percentage of the California workforce? And to David's earlier comment, can we manage to keep that $3 reduction in play, or are we going to lose that, you think? Either one of you guys.
Well, I think it's hard to predict, right? I mean, I think the current immigration policy topic at the federal level in California especially is a risk to the domestic workforce. And so that combined with the economic relief on the H2A program on paper, right, looks like more people should be adopting H2A. It is still expensive, right? So I mentioned in California, you're going to be paying $16.90 as the wage. You're still paying housing and inbound, outbound type of logistics costs. So I would put that at somewhere between $4 and $6 an hour, depending on where in this state you might be, or all sort of varies. But you take that H2A premium from maybe $10 an hour over a domestic worker down to 4 or 5, right? But it's still a premium. So I don't know that any of us can predict it. On whether we're going to be able to keep it, there has been now a lawsuit, as expected, filed against this rule. I'm not a lawyer. It does seem to me like this rule is pretty well reasoned and rational. So I think I don't know if anybody else has a better read on the legal landscape. But God willing, this rule gets preserved because it's absolutely something that's necessary. And I do think that they did a good job on building it as an alternative structure. It's rational, the rule that they made. So it should be defendable, but we'll see.
Hear that one? Can I say it depends? I think I think you have
Mayor Donahue says yes.
Yeah. I think you have two major forces at play. It's demographics versus irregular migration. How will those interact? You saw a lot of irregular migration from 2020 to 2024. From all indications, that has stopped. But again, and then obviously, areas, where we operate at, the San Joaquin Valley is a different cost of living structure than the coastal areas of, Salinas, Santa Maria, Camarillo area. So it's just, again, yeah, it's a demographics versus irregular migration formulation that if you could accurately predict that, I don't think we need to be in this ag space anymore.
We'd all go to Vegas. Right, right. So I'll ask you guys to tee up one final thought for the audience while we go to the audience for live questions. Anybody have questions for the panel? Yes, sir. Dean, up near the front. We got a microphone coming so we can get it recorded. Yes, please.
Thank you. Had a question for David on some of these numbers. How much do you know how much of our H2 labor in California is piece rate versus hourly? And my second question is, how did you increase productivity as the graph showed?
I don't have insight into the piece rate play. Again, the H2A models, I think two things. You have trying to pay piece rate in the state. Obviously, there's a lot of calculations that go into that. I don't have visibility into. I kind of have a general view of what we do internally, but I don't have a industry view. So again, I'm probably not the person to speak on a holistic scale for the industry. And then second question, productivity. It's just intentional focus. Again, you saw that part of that upswing on that graph I showed was more H2A workers being incorporated into that harvest crew. And again, just the training, the intentional focus, again, anything you focus on, whether it's a sport or anything, if there's a huge workforce development component into this program. That's something where, more so like domestic labor now, you hire domestic workers and then you come back next year and it's a bunch of new faces, where this H2A program, you kind of get the ability to really develop a workforce and, again, just intentional focus and being focused. And again, anything that's focused on, you can improve on, as long as there's, whether it's playing the guitar or anything else.
Any other audience questions? Yes, sir.
I'm from Texas, and we're dealing with South Africans somewhat, getting pushback on the reduction in wage from those workers wanting to come. And then also, how are y'all handling housing? We're at such a shortage of housing in our area. Are y'all building on farm? How are y'all working that?
Your concern on the AWR reduction, I think that's a real concern. Again, you have these workers. Again, I talk about the workforce. That workforce was last year used to making $19.97 an hour here, and they're going to be asked to make, can you take a $3? We anticipate some, dissatisfaction with that. I'm hoping that there's some efficiency bonuses that we can throw in to allow them to return to that wage. The other thing I'm hopeful of that we faced in this state is this overtime. Studies have shown this 840 overtime in the state has adversely affected the farm worker. You had guys that were used to coming up here working 60 hours a week. And again, these H2A workers, they're not here to recreate. They're not here to go to Disneyland. They want to make money for their families. They want to go home. And this 40-hour work week for guys that are here for a temperate time or a certain amount of time. I mean, there's been a 30% take-home pay reduction on these guys consolidating down this work week. So. Again, you have to be an optimist to do this business. I'm hoping maybe some overtime can be incorporated back into this, where these guys' overall weekly pay can get somewhat to where it was. Maybe they're working 45 or 50 hours, which again, these guys, they're here, they want to work, they want to do as good as best they can for their families. So hopefully there's maybe not the regiment that we've seen since this overtime, because you had this overtime thing overtime rally hit the state and this 8% increase. So it's kind of a double whammy. Hopefully those can kind of be merged, where maybe there's a little more flexibility on these customers. Say, let's run 5 hours overtime this week. So hopefully those things can take place and maybe backfill some of that wage reduction. But yes, do see that as a potential point of consternation.
I would just share on housing. I don't know what to tell you. It's hard everywhere. That's always a constraint. And the thing that happens in communities when H2A starts to grow in the ag community is that there becomes regulatory pressure from the municipal or county government because for two reasons. One is easier to address, which is that people are concerned about the temporary migrant workforce coming in and the impact that might have. That can be addressed, but people are concerned about the loss of housing, right? Losing housing that people who live there don't have access to. So it's a hard one, but just depending on the dynamics in your particular area, I would say coordinate with your local governments and with other growers and try to come up with a solution that kind of addresses those issues up front. Be proactive instead of letting it sneak up on you. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but certainly a lesson that's been learned out here over and over again.
If you want to comment on it, and then one final comment. I want each of you guys to leave the audience with your current perspective, one thought on kind of where we're going with H2A and labor and automation. But go ahead and respond.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to this, and again, we don't deal in the South African labor pool, but it's obviously heavily involved in Mexico and Guatemala. But again, I guess a comment to that is, again, I'm ignorant on South Africa, but I mean, you cannot overestimate the rapid advance in Mexico's economy and the massive middle class that's emerging in Mexico. And again, we're seeing the same kind of what you're referring to. Hey, this massively emerging Mexico economy. I mean, they want all the same things we want. Good schools for their kids, 40-hour work weeks. You're seeing that industrialization expectation take place in this workforce we're bringing up from Mexico. So, again, that's this wage adjustment and the elevated living standards, and I'm speaking more from a Mexico and Central American perspective, but again, there's a bit of a collision happening there of, their economy is rapidly, industrializing, and now they're, hey, come up here. Well, I can maybe work at a Chevrolet or a Ford dealership in Central Mexico and, get company-provided health care and all these other benefits that these corporations are offering versus coming up and doing ag work. So no, there's a major demographic and collision converging. That's why I don't think you cannot predict what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. Which just take it day by day, week by week, year by month by month, year by year. That's how this is going to roll out.
Maybe that's your final point. Flexibility still wins.
Final point for me is just think about the labor savings that are available now through professional labor management. We all look to the solutions of technology and all this other things that are coming, but right now, many growers are throwing some money away by using labor companies who are not equipped to deliver in the sort of modern age. And there are companies who specialize in helping get value. So I would say beware of the low quote, because, like many things, you get what you pay for. And good labor now can yield savings. So I guess that's my final point.
Yeah, it's a good one. Mike, you've seen the research side. You've seen the numbers. You've been part of this for 20 years, digging into the economics. What do you see?
Well, I think from an economics perspective, and both these guys talked about it, it's about productivity, right? Productivity per worker. It's not always the bottom line. I need to cut my costs. You pay more for a more productive worker, but they're going to increase your output more, and that's worth it. And I think it's thinking about it from a bigger picture perspective. Can I have someone driving a tractor pulling a laser weeder? Like, I've got to pay them more, but they're replacing or getting rid of a bunch of less paid, more workers, right? So it's that trade-off, right? And seeing automation, like seeing platform harvesters when you're picking tree fruit instead of having a bunch of ladders out there, right? They're more productive, and then they can go do other jobs as well, right? And so I think thinking about that productivity, thinking about working with people that can offer higher productivity is the way to go.
Yes, please.
I think just to dovetail this, talk about productivity and cost and everything, and it seems like the lesson that your typical, and I'm sure Matt bears the same burden, but we go to approach a customer to put together a deal, and then the tried and true, or the initial question inevitably is, what's your commission rate? What's your percentage increase? Again, it's not about the percentage increase. It's about cost per unit at the end of the day. So again, there's endless examples in life of, paying for something cheap and, having it fall apart or having more issues. But again, it's really, we try to continually educate our customers. I'm sure Matt does the same thing, but, what is my final cost per unit to you? Not why is your commission 3 points higher than this other guy that's down the street that drives a 40-year-old pickup, an ice cream truck or something like that. So I think it's just those types of perspectives. I mean, that's going to be the key to survival going forward here. Again, yes, the commission's a consideration, but again, like we're all trying to do is make enough money to be around next year. And but again, it's cost per unit, but offering productivity, offering value in that chain of services is crucial. So I guess that's my parting prayer.